On today's show, we're going to talk about the Denver Nuggets win over the Charlotte Hornets that actually had a couple interesting details and things to talk about, even if the game itself was boring. But more importantly, Reggie Jackson is coming to Denver to join the Nuggets and to join Thomas Bryant. We'll talk about all of that and more on today's Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody, and welcome into the Locked On Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we appreciate you making this your first listen each and every day. I'm Adam Mattes, flying solo today. Matt Moore is off. It's Super Bowl Sunday, doing a show on a Super Bowl Sunday for you guys here at Locked On. Matt and I usually don't record over the weekend. He is out in Kansas City. Big Chiefs fan, as I'm sure you guys know, as he never fails to point out to us. So he's out there celebrating, so I'm going to handle this solo today. Didn't think I'd have time tonight or tomorrow morning, so wanted to get one in because I know everybody's excited to talk about Reggie Jackson. I'm excited to talk about Reggie Jackson. So I'm excited for this. Going to talk about him in segment 2. In segment 3, I want to talk about the new look Nuggets. I mean, this is the Nuggets team that we're going to have, going into the playoffs and hopefully aiming to win the first championship in Denver Nuggets history. So I'm going to talk about, okay, what are the complications? How does all the pieces fit? What is everything going to look like? We'll get into all of that. But I want to start with the game just to get it out of the way. And I did think there were some big, some interesting things. The first part of this is that the best configured, the 3 most used lineups so far for the Nuggets this season, number 1 is the starters. That lineup has been really, really good. Murray, Porter, Jokic, Gordon, KCP. No surprise it has the biggest sample size, and it's like a plus 15, 16, something like that. It's very, very effective. The second most used one features Bruce Brown in for Jamal Murray. Actually, let's first go Bruce Brown in for Michael Porter Jr. That lineup has been slightly less effective. It's been like a plus 9, which is really good for most teams. But by Denver standards, for their starters, that's actually pretty low. I think it's because it's too small. We saw that early on in the season. If you put Bruce Brown and replace him with Jamal Murray, that has actually been the best lineup. So you got 2 defenders out on the perimeter in Bruce and KCP. You still have your power forwards or your 2 forwards in Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr., and then you got Jokic. So that lineup to me has been very interesting. And actually, this season, the Jokic MPJ lineup without Jamal Murray has a plus 20 net on 660 possessions, 664 to be exact. That's a pretty good sample size. And this, by the way, tracks. If you think about to the year where Jamal Murray got hurt, the Nuggets had like 20 games left in the season. I don't remember what the exact number is. Forgive me for being a little off on the specific details here, but they had 20 games or so. And I think they went 17-3, somewhere around there. A really good stretch without Murray, but they did have Porter. They did have Aaron Gordon. That was post-trade. And it ended up working out really well. We have a large sample size over the years of just how good the Jokic-Porter without Murray combo is. I don't think this means that Murray's not a great fit. That's ridiculous. That would be insane to say. The Murray-Jokic is the ceiling of the Nuggets in a lot of ways. Like we see what that looks like in the playoffs. We see what it looks like in the clutch. It's incredible. But there is something too when you have the Murray or you have the Jokic-Porter duo, especially when Aaron Gordon is there, and then you have low usage players behind them, very low usage. There's just something about it that works really well. So I'm intrigued by this again, without trying to say anything hot, like, oh, it's Murray or this or that. Like I'm not saying that because I don't believe that. But there's something to be unlocked or uncovered about the Nuggets when they play with those 2 guys without Murray, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. What was interesting about this last game was that you replace not only Murray with Bruce Brown, but then you replace Aaron Gordon, who's obviously great with the Nuggets, with Vlatko Čančar. And something interesting happened in it. To start the game, the Nuggets couldn't make a 3. In particular, KCP couldn't make a 3. And that, I think, tainted what was an overall phenomenal stint with that combination of players. I think they played 3 stints in this game to start the first, to end the second, to start the third. They were a minus 12 in their first stint. They finished the game a plus 9, that group. Raw numbers, not net rating, just raw numbers. And that tracks actually without the entire season. They have a 140 offensive rating, that specific group, and a 107 defensive rating, albeit on 83 possessions, fewer than 100 possessions, extremely small sample size. But in 83 possessions, they've outscored opponents by 26 points. That's raw numbers, not net rating, not adjusting for anything. So that lineup that has featured Jokic, Vlatko Cancar, and Bruce Brown, that lineup has actually been very, very effective alongside, the other two starters, Porter and KCP. Why is that? Well, I think one of the reasons is, and I've always said this is more true in the regular season than in the postseason, but the more you rely on Jokic, the better. And when you take out the players who are independently capable of scoring, number one is Jamal Murray. Like, pick and roll balls in his hands, he creates things. In the clutch, in the playoffs, when things get hard and you game plan, you obviously need that. But I think if the team were just to play through Jokic and trust Jokic every single time in the regular season, and especially in quarters 1 through 3, that would probably be like the best scenario. It's the most consistently great thing you can do. If you give Vlatko Cancar into that lineup and Aaron Gordon's another guy who can create on his own and who also demands the ball on mismatches, rightfully so. He's great at punishing them, and there's these auxiliary benefits to the fouls he draws and the pressure he puts on the defense. If you remove him, though, and Jamal Murray, you end up getting Bruce Brown, who's going to be aggressive, but relying on Jokic. He's mostly aggressive off of Jokic. You got KCP, who's not aggressive. He takes shots when he's open, but he's not really looking to score. MPJ, who ratchets up his aggressiveness a little bit when Murray's not in there, but he's still mostly a dependent player. And then Vlatko Cancar, who is like exclusively a dependent player. So you get all these dependent players around Jokic, and you end up with a 140 offensive rating. Now, this is against what's arguably the worst team in the NBA, Charlotte Hornets, who are post-trade deadline, basically shutting everything down and tanking. So take it all with a grain of salt. But there's lesson that you learn through every situation, and I do think there's something to Denver when they're that dependent on Jokic in the regular season. There's just something to it. That being said, they were down big to start. They dominated. They ended up beating the spread in this game despite being down 13-2 to start, which kind of just shows you how easy this game was. I think Nuggets fans watching this on the heels of the Orlando Magic loss, I'm saying this as somebody who was also experiencing all these emotions. Like, you're watching it and you're kind of like, man, this is frustrating. The Nuggets don't look good. I saw takes on the timeline about, oh, this is why you miss Murray, or this. Like, no kidding. Of course, this is why you miss Murray. But the fact that the Nuggets were able to be that cold early on, 1 of 11 from 3 in the first quarter, which was really the story. That's why they were down 12. But 1 of 11, they only made 5 threes all game. So they actually shot horribly in this game, even after the 1 of 11. But 1 of 11 was especially horrible. To be able to survive that and win anyway, to me, shows you something good about the Nuggets and how even when the shots aren't falling, they can find something else. A lot of this had to do with Jokic completely took the game over after the first period. I thought he had a not so great first 7 minutes of the game. In fact, a pretty terrible. Had a bunch of turnovers that were, I always talk about, there's some that are systemic and some that are lazy. Both were in this game. Some of this is Jokic, when you're depending on him that much and there's no other creators, he's going to try to force it a little bit more in transition or thread the needle or whatever. But then I thought some of them were just like, come on, Jokic, like, they're not being serious. You're not taking the game serious enough. And by the way, he was probably right. They won this game by 15 points without him focused. So what do you know? But Jokic, I thought, took over at the end of his first stint, and then for the rest of the game, he just dominated the game. He was appropriately aggressive and made the right plays. And then Michael Porter, I had a note in here that I don't think this was a particularly good game from him. In fact, it was horrible. He had 0 points at the half. It was horrible. But what was encouraging about it, and I actually have to give a shout out to Ryan Blackbird, listening to his show earlier today as I was going to get coffee, and he had a point about sometimes it's just nice for a player to fight through adversity. He was having a horrible game and nothing was coming easy for him, and his defense was even bad. He came out in the second half and played better, and that's no small thing. I know he's been in the league now a couple years, but it is nice to know that Michael Porter can come out of a slump by just trying to be aggressive and trying to be, tougher or whatever. So to me, it's a small thing, but it's meaningful. He was in a little 6-quarter slump. Hopefully he's out of that. And then lastly, the Nuggets defense was great. I mean, one of the things, if you take out, again, a Jamal Murray or whatever, one of the things is you lose offense, so you need to double down on defense. And a lot of Denver's best defensive players were in this game. They had a 100 defensive rating, again, against a horrible team. But you look at the starters, even Jokic at 94.7, Bruce Brown 94.4, Christian Brown, who's just an insane defender, 98.3. You had a lot of guys that when they were on the court, the other teams were not scoring. And I think that's really encouraging for Denver. So all in all, albeit a pretty meaningless game because it was the Charlotte Hornets, the Orlando Magic game was meaningless as well. But Denver in this one found a way to get a win despite getting off to such a horrible start. I said this on the DNVR show, but these are the dog days of the NBA season. A lot of people don't like to hear it because you think, oh, it's NBA players. Like, just be happy, just go out there and work hard. I'm sorry, it is. It's the dog days. These people are human, and they've been going through a season where I think everyone is banged up. Jamal Murray is banged up. We'll talk a little bit more about just how banged up he is and what level of concern everybody should have here in segment 3. Aaron Gordon's banged up. I imagine Nikola Jokic is just tired, just physically worn down. This is the time of the year where you're very close. You're 5 days away from a nice 1 week break, and 1 week for a professional athlete is huge. You get to rest up. All of those little bruises and stuff can go away. Your mind can reset, and you kind of get refocused for the playoffs. The Nuggets are right there. They might have a little case of senioritis, but it's understandable. And then Orlando, Charlotte, even Miami tomorrow, these games don't mean anything to Denver. Like, there's nothing important other than just stacking wins that these games represent. So I understand that I predict that Denver is either going to lose against Miami or they're going to win a game that doesn't give you a ton of confidence. Meaning they win a game and you're kind of like, all right. There's a little added bonus that I think Reggie Jackson and Thomas Bryant have a chance of making their debut. Certainly Thomas Bryant. I know he played at the end of this last game, but I imagine he'll play 15 to 20 minutes against Miami. So that'll be an exciting thing. And if Reggie Jackson joins the team as well, that'll make that game extremely entertaining and exciting. So those things aside, I just think that these are basically a run out the clock situation and try to get 2 wins before you head into a nice break where you can refocus and get ready for the home stretch. Guys, as a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs can help you hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experience to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and free. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn Jobs, linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. You can post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We'll be right back with more Locked On Nuggets. Back here, segment 2 of Locked On Nuggets podcast. Matt out today with the Super Bowl. We've got some people in the chats. Oh, I look at this. I see Locked On Clippers in the chat. Curious what they have to say. Don't have time to go through these, but I'll scroll through them a little bit later and kind of see what the other side is thinking about this Bones-Reggie swap, which, by the way, is effectively what this was. This reminds me, the way the trade deadline unfolded, reminds me a little bit of how free agency unfolded for the Nuggets. What was the first move that happened in free agency? DeAndre Jordan. Was that the first deal that was agreed upon by the Denver Nuggets? No. Was their plan get DeAndre Jordan first and figure everything else out later? No. But because that's how the deals came in, I know a lot of Nuggets fans freaked out about it. Like, oh my God. The truth is the move was Bruce Brown. The moves in the offseason was KCP, Bruce Brown, Christian Brown, which I think Nuggets fans would look at and say, home run, home run, home run. Those are 3 phenomenal, additions. But because the DeAndre Jordan moves came out, people it slanted perspective. I think the same is true of this Bones Highland deal. All of the moves that happened here were essentially one. And I'm telling you with confidence. Somebody was putting in the chat, you guys, you've been talking about Reggie Jackson a lot lately, and now here he is. Guess what? That's not by coincidence. Knew this deal was coming a couple of days prior, or I didn't know it was coming. I knew that it was very likely to be coming a few days ago, just from conversations I had with different people around the Nuggets in the front office. So this was a thing that I knew was part of the grander plan. And I know I saw somebody, I think it was James Marilat over at The Fan, put out on Twitter the other day, Bones is going to be really good. I hope you enjoy those second-round picks. Those second-round picks that Denver got never came to Denver. They immediately went back to the Lakers, came from the Clippers, went to the Lakers. And this should be looked at as the same deal. So this was not Bones for 2 seconds. This was Davon Reed, Bones Highland, and 1 second-round pick for Thomas Bryant and Reggie Jackson. If a trade like that would have happened, first of all, that would have been an illegal trade. You couldn't have gotten Reggie Jackson for that. He had to get traded, and the Clippers wouldn't have done it. They had to do it in a separate deal, knowing that he would get bought out by Charlotte and that Denver would target him. So again, you couldn't have done that. But if that was the deal, I think people would have looked at that and said, oh, interesting. You get a guy who's been on 2 Western Conference Finals teams in Reggie Jackson, who's an experienced player, whether you like him or hate him. you at least say like, oh yeah, that's a backup caliber point guard for a championship quality team. And Thomas Bryant, that's a backup center option for a championship quality team. And you lost Davon Reed, who was never going to play in the playoffs. You lost a second-round pick, which how valuable is that? You're talking about what will likely be the 50th overall pick in a draft. Again, you don't just throw away second-round picks, but the odds of that being an impact player are so ridiculously low that if you just went like the average 50th pick, how many minutes did they play in the playoffs for teams? It's like 1 out of 20 probably play those minutes. So again, very, very low leverage. And then, of course, Bones Hyland, who's a great player and a great prospect, but we all know kind of didn't work. Whether or not it was good value for Bones Hyland is now in the rearview mirror. The question to ask is the team now better than what they were? I think that there's no question there is, given what you could have expected from Bones Hyland in Denver with what you can expect from Reggie Jackson and Thomas Bryant here in Denver. Let's start with Reggie Jackson. He's 6'2" with a 7-foot wingspan, one of the longest wingspan to height ratios in all of the NBA. And this is no small thing. I actually think that big wingspan, I've said this, Bones has a great wingspan, by the way, too. I think he's 6'7" wingspan. Just shows you how much bigger Reggie Jackson's is with 7 feet. Like, he has really, really long arms. And I don't think that's a small thing when you talk about guarding pick and rolls, when you talk about backdoor cuts. Jokic loves to lead the receiver. He's really good at those. I think that Reggie Jackson is going to fit in to the extent that he plays with Jokic. He's been to 2 conference finals, as I mentioned, one with the Thunder way back when he was 23, once with the Clippers 2 years ago where they lost to the Suns. So he's been through playoffs. And by the way, that one with the Clippers, they were missing their guys. He came up big in some of those games. Like, he had some really nice games in the playoff run that were like, oh, wow, Reggie. I mean, that was in many ways like one of his career peaks. Again, circumstantial because he had an opportunity that usually he wouldn't have had, but he stepped up in those big minutes. Does that mean he's a big game player? I don't know. He had a nice run. I think he's a nice solid piece that's at least battle tested, and that's no small thing when you talk about how unfamiliar the playoffs are for a lot of people. He's not having a very good year at all. He scored 20 points just 6 times this season. He scored under 10 points 23 times this season. You could chalk that up. I think this Clippers team is one of the more difficult teams to sort of know things about. When you see like so many people are picking the Clippers to win the West or this or that, even as recently a few weeks ago, a lot of this is not anything to do with their net ratings or any of this or that. It's just like, we don't know what the Clippers are. We've barely seen them together. And I think a player like Reggie Jackson, who was on this team in the absence of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, or when they were in and out of the lineups or whatever, and then you move from being like, ooh, I was actually higher up on the pecking order, and now you come in and you're even lower than before. I imagine some of that caused some disruption. Again, I'm just looking as the outside in, some of the disruption. There also might be the case that smallish point guards, and even though he has the big wingspan, he's small. When they hit a wall, they usually just like completely fall off. This is one of the things I think Fred VanVleet, it was well publicized that he was being shopped. I think one of the reasons he wasn't traded is because you're trying to get as much value out of him. But I wonder if the rest of the league looks at it and goes, undersized point guard on the other side of 30, who was never, wasn't quite that A-list tier, the Chris Paul level tier. He wasn't quite that. We're worried that the drop-off might come quick. Is that what happened with Reggie Jackson? It might be. I haven't watched enough of him to know and to really see those indicators, but for whatever reason, he's not having a very good season. He has a career 35% three-point shooter, shooting 35% this year. I think that number is likely to be pretty consistent with what you can expect in Denver. Players have come to Denver. KCP's having a career year. Bruce Brown's having a career year. AG's having a career year. Michael Porter's shooting 44% for the 4th straight season. Jamal Murray's shooting a great percentage. There's something about playing in Denver. I mean, playing alongside Jokic, but even in the system where I think you can expect that 3-point field goal percentage to be at least in line with the career average, if not a little bit above. Like, Denver just has a very good offensive rhythm, a very good offensive culture, meaning the guys come here, they play the right way, and the shots, everybody shoots a little bit better because it's all in rhythm. But nonetheless, I don't think you can expect him to go off for like 40% or just be like this knockdown outside guy. He is shooting up 42% on catch and shoot this year. I tracked his career, and the catch and shoot numbers were the most chaotic. He had some seasons where he was shooting like 46%, some seasons where he shot 33%. I don't know what to make of that, other than to say I'm guessing he's just going to be like an average guard as a catch and shoot weapon. And should he play a lot with Jokic, he'll probably get more catch and shoots opportunities than he has at any point in his recent career. He also takes 22% of his shots in the floater zone this year, which is very interesting to me. typically speaking, the floater zone's not very good unless you're one of the great floater zone shooters, a Jokic, a KD. We all know who the guys are that are great from that zone. A lot of your elite players can get to that floater zone, especially point guards, and finish at a high level. He's not one of them. I'm curious to see if that number changes the most. But from the intel I've gathered from talking to my people around the league, as well as people directly from the Clippers, he seems like a very good and mature person. One of the things about Bones Highland, like whenever there's a breakup, fan bases run to two different directions. One is the I can't believe you gave away this great player for nothing. He had so much promise. It's not a wrong perspective. There's an insight there, but he is also young. Then there's the character assassination, like, oh, this selfish guy, we had to get rid of him because there was no saving such a selfish player, which again is also, I think, partially true. What I think is the best way to look at it is very few players, especially the people that have come through the NBA ranks, are great. They need time. Bones Highland's a 22-year-old. Reggie Jackson was at one point a 20-year-old in the NBA, and I think that there was a reputation around him in the first half of his season that maybe he was a disruptor. He wasn't with the program. He didn't get it. He's managed to stay in the NBA for 12 seasons now. That's no small feat. That's pretty impressive. One of the ways you stay in the NBA that long is you show evolution, you show growth. And a lot of what I've heard about Reggie Jackson from different people in the know is that he's one of these guys that has shown personal growth and has molded himself into a good teammate and a guy who's with the program. Now, I do think he has a little bit of Will Barton in his game, a little bit of Bones Highland in his game, where he thinks he's about 10% better than he is. And sometimes like the ball can stick with him. I mean, we've all seen that with him. And when it works, just like with Bones, it looks great. And when it doesn't, it can be frustrating. I do think he's going to have to fit into the Denver culture. But the thing is, he's never actually been on a team like Denver. If you look at the places he's been, Detroit, the Clippers, all these other places, they don't have a centerpiece like a Jokic. I mean, there's very few of them to begin with, or a style like Jokic. That doesn't mean he is going to fit in. It just means we've never seen it. And we've seen a lot of players. I mean, Austin Rivers is the best example of this, of a player who had a reputation coming in. Ball sticks, like he's a problem guy. He's got attitude, this or that. And he comes into Denver and you see like, oh my God, this guy's actually none of those things. And you plug him into the system and his game perfectly adapts and he seems comfortable doing it. I think it would be great for both the Nuggets, obviously, but I think it would even be great for Reggie Jackson if he were to be a guy that came in and fit that mold. I mean, again, he's a buyout guy right now. He'll have an opportunity to sign new deals in the offseason. You come in and fit into that. I think you start to look at it and go, okay, he was in Detroit. That wasn't a great situation. He was in the Clippers, which was a chaotic situation, whether it was good or bad. It just was a little bit of chaos with the guys that were in and out. You come to Denver and fit in, it might give you a little bit of new life to extend that career even more. So I think there's reason to hope for that. But more than anything, then you start to look at the things about where is he going to play? Can he play? Let's first start with, can he play with Jamal Murray? I think the answer is probably yes. One of the big things about playing with Jamal, though, is going to be, I think Jamal really hurt Bones Highland this season. And what I mean by that, whether it was intentional, unintentional, whatever, I thought Murray did not do a very good job of staying aggressive when Bones was running point. And I don't think he did a good job of looking for Bones when Murray was being aggressive running point, meaning I don't think there was ever synergy there. And I suspect a little bit of this came from perhaps behind the scenes tensions. I mean, we've learned about some of these over the last couple of weeks, but they've been there in terms of like, does Bones get it? Is he a guy that, everybody's kind of buying into and the veterans believe in? Was the work ethic there? All of those different things. And I do think that at least to some degree, I don't want to overstate it, at least to some degree, there might have been a little bit of self-sabotage just in terms of like, we don't really think this guy is with it. So why would I go out of my way? We saw Murray sometimes this year just look like pass up wide open shots, specifically from Bones, pass up, like just go to the corner and stand and be like, okay, well, this is your turn. Like almost not passive aggressively, but a little bit of that. I think that a lot of Reggie Jackson's success with the Nuggets is going to stem from how does Jamal Murray interact with him? How does he play with him? Reggie Jackson is going to be best when he is the appropriate amount of aggressive off of Murray if they're stagging together. But to do that, Murray has to be setting him up and thinking about him and working with him and communicating with him in between games and on the bench and different things like that about, hey, here's how we're going to work best together. And vice versa. Murray is so good off ball. He's really good as the secondary ball handler in some configuration. So if you allow Reggie to bring the ball up and run the first action and it doesn't work, and then it triggers into the weak side, we're going to swing the ball and have Murray run into something like that. to me works really well, but it requires a level of trust and communication, and it has to be a little bit deliberate. So that's one of the things that I think absolutely can work together. Size-wise, it can work together. The only thing it complicates is how do you work out a rotation there? Because Bruce Brown and Christian Brown have been some of the best Nuggets players so far, and you can't play all four of those guys. And you're playing Bruce Brown at power forward. You're just setting him up to fail. So really what has to happen is a nice stagger. One of the things would be a nice stagger where you're getting certain guys in and you never have more than 3 of those guys at a time. I think it's doable. I think it's very difficult, and I don't think it's a trait that Michael Malone has demonstrated to be very good at, balancing complex rotations when you have 10 guys who can play. So if I had one concern about this, it's clearly Michael Malone, and would he start making choices that you look at and just kind of scratch your head? Yes, I think that's very, very likely, but I think there's something there. The next part is, could Reggie Jackson play with Jokic? Because if you're staggering Murray with the bench, that means some of his minutes will be with Reggie, but some of those minutes will be Reggie with Jokic. This is where I think he would be incredible should he, again, be buying into lowering his usage but upping his efficiency, which is the thing you do when you come to play with Jokic. But I think the opportunity is there. First of all, Reggie still has a very quick first step. And I've always said players with a first step are dangerous with Jokic because those backdoor cuts are so deadly. So I think we're going to get a lot of that. Then you have just the idea that you have other options in there. You're going to have an enormous amount of spacing, the ball be moving, and there's just so many other options where it's that equal opportunity offense. So I think the cuts off ball, I think the defense and the length that he can provide can augment a lot of what Denver does. And I just think the rhythm of the game can come to him. I don't know if he'll step into that, but I think that there's a real opportunity for that to happen. And by the way, you're replacing a player in Bones Highland who wasn't playing very well this season, whether he's good or not. Part of this is, what were you working with? Denver plays a lot of minutes with their starters. Jokic a plus 500 on the year. I put the stat on Twitter the other day, but only one player on the season is a overall plus 500. It's Jokic. Only 3 players are plus 400 or better. It's Jokic, KCP, and Aaron Gordon. Yep. And then I think 5th on that, then you have Jason Tatum, who's like 390. And then behind him, you have Michael Porter. So 4 of the top 5 players in the NBA in raw plus minus are all Denver Nuggets players. That just goes to show you that, one, the starters play a lot of minutes together and they're very effective. But 2, it's unbelievable the degree to which they are effective. So what you're replacing is the non-Jokic minutes. That's where you're looking to succeed. And Bones was one of the worst this season. Not saying it should have been this way, not saying whose fault it is. I'm just saying that when he was on the court, the Nuggets were getting murdered the same way players that are on Detroit or Houston or something get murdered. So you're trying to be better than what appeared to be one of the worst case options. People that have been following the Nuggets long enough know, well, didn't we say the same thing about Facu a year ago? Haven't we said this thing about player X from 2018-19? Yes, and I think there's something to this about the way Denver does the rotation and perhaps about how difficult it is to build second units when you're not sharing the court with Jokic. And I don't know what that is. I suspect it has more to do with the fact that Denver plays their starters together more than any other team. And if every team rotated the way that Michael Malone rotates, you'd probably have more teams who have terrible benches. So, but nonetheless, that's where we're at. Let's take another break. On the other side, though, I want to start talking about Thomas Bryant now and where he fits in, where Thomas Bryant and Reggie Jackson now fit in to a completely new look Nuggets lineup. But first, I want to tell you about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. I love betting on threes. It's my favorite thing. Bill, discuss your favorite NBA bets of the week. Can include core market spreads, money line totals. You do all kinds of different cool things. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Someone says, please, no Reggie Jackson and Jamal Murray lineups. Buckle up. Buckle up. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. All right, back here, segment 3. So Thomas Bryant made his debut. It was a soft debut. He played 2 minutes of garbage time, missed 1 shot. I don't think we should really count it. His real debut, I suspect, will come against Miami. I'm excited for Thomas Bryant. A couple things about him. Again, I've done more research on him than I have with Reggie, just because obviously he was locked in. But Thomas Bryant has really, really great touch. I would say the number one trait of Thomas Bryant is that he's a natural born scorer, meaning there are guys that Michael Porter Jr. is this way. He doesn't always see the court right. He doesn't always get to the spots. He doesn't have the best handle, but just points come to him. Like he just, even when he's having takes bad shots, they just seem to go. I think Thomas Bryant is this way in that he has a knack for putting the ball in the basket in a variety of different ways, and mostly because he has great touch. You're going to see him with a lot of these Jokic little floaters and push shots from 10 feet away, and they just go in at a really, really high rate. I was talking to somebody in the basketball world the other day about Thomas Bryant. Actually reached out to me and compared him. It was such an interesting comparison. They compared him to Mo Spates. If you remember back with those Warriors team, Mo Spates didn't always have, he didn't look like a basketball player. He was kind of bigger built. He wasn't particularly a prototype of anything, but he just had a knack for scoring. He just would shot 10% better on every shot he took than most people, or more than even what you expected. And I think Thomas Bryant has a lot to his game there. I've also heard that he's an incredibly hard worker, that he's very smart and very driven. I think he's going to be one of these players. It reminds me of my guy, Isaiah Hartenstein, who, by the way, started off great, was terrible. Now he's back to being pretty good again. But he's one of those guys who I think is going to pick up a lot from playing with Jokic and watching Jokic. Even last night, I saw Thomas Bryant out running the DHOs in his he had a terrible pass attempt, but I think he's going to be one of these guys that the more he just observes Jokic and these things, you're going to see some more hey, there's something there. He is in very many ways still a young player. He's had a bit of a cursed career, as almost any player has who had ACL injury before they fully broke out. He was getting some traction in Washington, gets the injury, and then has kind of been fighting that. But I do think there's reason to, when you look at the data in particular, to say every player has a runway for when they come back from a major injury. And I think he's through his. So I kind of imagine and think there's reason to hope that the Thomas Bryant's best basketball could be played over these last 2 months. That he's actually, Denver is going to get the best version of him. I think there's reason to be optimistic for that. He obviously wants a payday. I mean, this is it's not for sure that it'll be a rental, but it's likely to be a rental. He's good enough to be a starting caliber center if he can just stay healthy and prove that he can stay healthy. And I think that whatever it is that comes his way, he's probably going to be looking for that. So this is a showcase, and what better place than to come to Denver to kind of showcase what you can do. He's hyper efficient. I think he is one of the leaders in true shooting percentage on the season. He has more to his game than what the Lakers have asked him to do, but it should be encouraging that he never stepped outside those lines. This is a guy looking for a payday, playing alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, and yet he didn't do the things that would have sabotaged that team, saying oh my God, here he goes again trying to post up, or here he goes taking threes he's not supposed to. He knows he can do those things, didn't do them. And I have a suspicion that Denver is going to ask him to do a little bit more, or allow him to do a little bit more and say, you know what, why don't you test out your 3-point shot? We're going to build in a couple actions where it's pick and pop for you. And if you're open, pull the trigger. Don't be shy on these, at least early on. He might have more to his game. He's shooting 44% from three so far this season. Super low volume. It's lower than Zeke Naji volume, but nonetheless, it's better than missing them. And I think there's just something, given his touch in other zones, that you can say, hey, there might be something to this. He's a very good screener, in part because he's enormous. I think he's going to be one of those guys that if Murray is running with him in pick and rolls, Murray is going to get a lot of mid-range opportunity because of how strong he's, Thomas Bryant sets those screens. He rebounds the ball really well. So I think, all those things will be good. He's not a very good defender. Let's not kid ourselves. Talking to some people around the league, there are some people that believe he can be better than what he's shown. I'm a little bit more skeptical about the defensive end. And I think when you start to think about Thomas Bryant and Reggie Jackson, and then you start to say, okay, well, now how do they all fit into the equation? First of all, that second unit couldn't find anybody to score. Jamal Murray needs to solve a lot of this. But you might have noticed that Jamal Murray's missed a few games, and that it has to do with right knee swelling, and that this may be just an accumulative thing over the season, overcompensating, natural when you come back from an ACL to be overcompensating a little bit. I think there's reason to believe that, as nice as it's been that Jamal Murray has played in a couple back-to-backs lately and pushed himself, I think there's reason to believe that from this point until the playoffs, the Nuggets are going to be and should be overly cautious with Jamal Murray. I would not be surprised if over the last 25 games, he missed 7 or 8 of them. That sounds like a really high number, and it is a high number. But I think it's the smart thing. One, I wouldn't be surprised if he missed the next 2 going into the All-Star break. I wouldn't be surprised if he missed the remaining, I think, 4 or 5 back-to-backs. Just why play him? Shut it down. And then 1 or 2 in between then, if there's like some swelling up, maybe the end of the season, if you have a game cushion or something like that, he might sit. So when you start to look at 7, 8, 9 games he might miss out of the last 25, you need point guards. You need somebody that can play. So I think Reggie Jackson's value is as much about that, where, okay, well, we still have a guy playing his natural position in point guard rather than like Bruce Brown over or Ish Smith, who to me is very hot or cold. He's okay player, but I don't think Ish Smith is a championship caliber minute player in the playoffs. So you get Reggie Jackson. I think it's going to elevate your games when Jamal Murray misses. And like I said, he'll miss a lot. But you do lose some things by adding these guys. Number one, there was never an identity to begin with the second unit, but I do think in Bones' absence over the last couple of weeks, there was a defensive identity. Is that still going to be the case with Reggie and Thomas Bryant there? I just said Thomas Bryant's not a great defender, but more importantly, Denver was great because of their ability to switch everything with those lineups with Zeke and Flacco playing a lot of minutes. You probably lose that with Thomas Bryant. You don't want to switch a bunch. We'll see what Denver does. You don't want to switch a whole bunch, but that might be one consequence is they become a less defensive-minded lineup. Also offensively, if you just told me, okay, Reggie Jackson, Bruce Brown, Christian Brown, Thomas Bryant, and then we don't know who the stagger will be. Is it just going to be a straight bench? Are you going to play more minutes fully with your full bench? Wouldn't be a bad thing to try out, in my opinion. So is that Vlatko Čančar? Okay, let's just say that. That 5-man unit, the number one option is probably Thomas Bryant / Reggie. Reggie Jackson will have the ball in his hand, so maybe it's Reggie Jackson where the number 2 is Thomas Bryant. So your number 1 and number 2 options all of a sudden become new players. That means the identity is completely different. So to me, there is going to be some question marks around the second unit. It might look good tomorrow night if both guys play because no team has scouted them. And usually the advantage goes to a team where you're like, we don't know what they're going to do. But I do think they lose a little bit of their defensive identity, and you're really going to need Thomas Bryant to score, to draw fouls. You really need Reggie Jackson to play in control but be aggressive, which is a tough balancing act for him. So I think it is going to be a little bit difficult there. Overall, though, I think this is a major win for the Nuggets. You're talking about a bench lineup that, when Jokic was not on the court, performed like the worst team in the NBA. Can they be better than that? Can they just be a net neutral? Can they just be a 0? First of all, we've seen the second unit be that more often than not since Bones got benched. The bench has been like a 0, a +2, a -2, somewhere in there, which is, if you do that, you're going to win almost every time. I was looking at this. Denver, Jokic had only been a +7 or less like 13 times this season. How crazy is that? I can't remember what it was, but Denver, when Jokic was a +8 or better, was like 30-2 this season. It was something ridiculous. And that's +8. Let me see. I have it right here in front of me. +8 or better 35 times, and Denver has lost twice. So they are 33-2 when Jokic is a +8 or better. That's a lot of games. For reference, they are 3-10 when he is a +7 or less. That just tells you that more often than not, Jokic and the starters are going to be a +8 or better. More often than not, almost always. And then that just tells you if your bench can be a -5 or less, you're probably going to win the games. And I think this new look group is going to be that. So I'm very optimistic about these additions. There is some disaster potential. I mean, Reggie Jackson has not been the most solid player. I do think Denver needs solid guys, and he is a little bit more of peaks and valleys type. But I do think that surrounding him by Christian Brown, Bruce Brown, Thomas Bryant, hopefully will normalize some of those things so that you get the best of him and not the worst of him. And then more importantly, just that Nuggets culture. I mean, so many guys have come into Denver and even on their departure have raved about what it's like here, how different it is, and how much Jokic being your team's best player and existing on the plane that he does, just very low maintenance, not like having problems with guys in the locker room or this or that, how much that kind of gets everyone to buy in. And I think that we're going to see Reggie Jackson buy into what Denver's asking. Whether or not he's capable of pulling that off is another question, but I do think you're going to get the best version of him. That's it for me today, guys. The Nuggets it's Super Bowl Sunday, so we're going to take the rest of the day off. Take tomorrow off as well. This will be for Monday's show. But we do have the Nuggets playing on Monday at Miami, and it'll be our first look at Thomas Bryant and perhaps our first look at Reggie Jackson. Should be an exciting one. Hit that like button. We'll see everybody next time.